For poor countries have reached record high levels. A new research released today by Jubilee Debt Campaign shows the average developing country's debt servicing cost, that is, increased by 115% in the last decade between 2010 and 2020. A total of 52 countries are now in serious debt crisis. These figures do not fully account then for the impact of the COVID-19 crisis. Martyn Davies, who is the Managing Director of Emerging Markets and Africa at Deloitte, joins us now via video call. Martyn, we haven't even taken into account what COVID-19 could be doing to people's debt balances in terms of countries, that is, but these numbers are already staggering and quite shocking.
Yeah, Billy. Yeah, good day to you. I'm afraid I don't want to compound your woes, but there's no good news here. The only maybe sort of upside is everyone's debt is increasing. Of course, cost of capital is relatively low globally, but of course, it's always a premium cost for African sovereigns. A lot of people have been talking about the shape of a recovery. Will it be a V-shaped recovery, a U-shape, a W-shape with sort of erratic stop-starts, or an L-shape? And someone said recently in Financial Times, and probably true, this applies to countries as you referred to, the real shape is F, and that's frugal. And I think it's very frugal times ahead, I'm afraid.
You have 115% growth then, or in the number of debt servicing costs, or the growth in the debt servicing costs for the developing countries on average. We clearly haven't actually made it out of the 2008-2009 financial crisis, because surely that's where this stems from.
Well, already a lot of this, I think a lot of countries not learn the lessons from 2008. We often talk about structural reform or diversification, and the sort of three how can I say, buckets of economies that have been most dramatically impacted here. Those which are dependent on oil, those dependent on on tourism, and also remittances of migrant labor. So we think countries in the Middle East, think Saudi, the Emirates, Kuwait, many other countries like that, who've been hit dramatically by the lack of remittances and values on exports of oil. Think also in our part of the world, Nigeria, Angola, stereotypically. On the tourism side, countries in southern Europe, particularly, even as in South Africa, you were talking about it earlier, have been dramatically hit. And then thirdly, on the migrant labor, many countries looking at Africa, particularly this part of the world, in East Africa especially, large amounts of remittances received from labor, predominantly based in the Middle East. So it's been sort of, and certain countries even, have more than one of these very negative impacts. So going forward, countries currencies need to reprice. Of course, debt is almost always dollar denominated, and you haven't mentioned also the increased volatility of EM, emerging market currencies, and declining currencies. Think South Africa, for example, makes our US dollar denominated debt even more expensive, thus difficult to service. But going forward, I'm afraid it's about frugality, it's about austerity, and we need to see public sectors really sort of requiring significant economic adjustment to reduce cost and paying this debt off for longer term.
Let's stay with that sentiment of looking forward, and perhaps you can help me look into somewhat of your crystal ball using your really cool glasses there, Martyn. What happens moving on from here, though? I mean, can African countries actually, or developing countries, should I say, actually make things better? Can the turn of the decade be a better one from here on in?
Look, it's going to be tough. I mean, typically, Paul Kagame, president of Rwanda, warned about a month or so ago, and even before a lot of this very negative data is coming through, but it could take a generation to recover. And I don't think he's wrong in many cases. You mentioned about 2008 crisis. I think maybe more potent and more recent is the post mid-2014 oil crisis, which has affected many countries in the western part of the continent, particularly Middle East as well, and countries have yet to really recover from that, i.e. recovery driven by structural reform. The governments need to be a lot more responsive to market forces, be so much more pro-business, pro-capital formation, pro-private sector. In South Africa's case, every country has, to an extent, a unique circumstance. In our case, you will find that the debt will be very suppressive of growth. And the only way, really, I think the only precedent I can think of or know of in recent economic history is post-1945 Western economies, particularly the US, and which were heavily indebted post the cost of supporting the war effort for previous 4 or 5 years or so, and were only able to get through that debt situation effectively by the early 70s. How? By keeping inflation low and growing sustainably at arguably 3.5%. So we can only grow our way out of this debt through such measures. But this will take significant, not papering over the cracks, but significant reform for a large number of emerging economies, particularly those that entered this crisis in a very precarious and weak position. Again, South Africa, Exhibit A here, entering despite global tailwinds to high growth. We entered this period in a recessionary situation. Not a happy story, I'm afraid.
Yeah, but it does tell, Martyn, the difference between the two major institutions that we keep crying about, the South African Reserve Bank and government, effectively, in making sure that fiscal and monetary policy, yes, do work hand in hand, but not necessarily that they just cross over each other at the same time. Both institutions need to work really well in order to get this country moving forward, and other developing countries as well. Martyn, appreciate the time. Thank you so much. Always good chatting to you as well. Keep well there. We'll hopefully chat to you soon. That's Martyn Davies there, who's
thank you.
Director
nice to see you.
Emerging Markets at Deloitte. We take a short ad break.